From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 542. I'm Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, DP3 in our forum, and DP3G and DP384 on X. Derek, we've got some more NBA 2K25 news. We connected over Parsec to hit the virtual hardwood ourselves, so lots to talk about this week. With that being said, please tip us off.
Yeah, we have a loaded agenda today, Andrew. First, we will discuss the new era that was announced for MyNBA Eras and NBA 2K25, which is the Steph Era. I also have two community questions related to MyNBA Eras. This will be part of the same segment. Second, we will discuss MyNBA News, which was recently announced in an official NBA 2K25 courtside report. Next, Andrew and I played a co-op game of NBA 2K17 between the Warriors and Cavaliers, which is technically the beginning of the Steph era, according to Take-Two. And finally, we played a co-op game of NBA ShootOut 2004, my favorite game in the ShootOut series. We will give our impressions related to that session. So a lot to go over. But Andrew, first, as predicted on a prior NLSC podcast, the mid-2010s were selected by Take-Two for the new MyNBA era. They are calling it the Steph era, and it will be starting in 16-17. And I have some thoughts on that, but before I go over those, this is not a surprise.
Not at all. We predicted it on a previous show, as you said. A lot of people in the community thought it was going to be mid to late 2010s. There was some speculation, hopeful speculation, I suppose, about the 70s, if they're going to wind it back and maybe give us ABA versus NBA, or maybe another late 90s or another midpoint in the 80s, whatever. But a lot of people thought that the 2010s, the late 2010s, would be the most logical step. And I think it is. I mean, the name is what it is, and we will get into that, obviously. But as I said on that previous show, it makes sense. It's that midpoint between the LeBron era and today, and it gets us a little bit closer to some of the stars that came along in the past 5 years or so.
Yeah, and in a rare case, I actually disagree with some of the community about the implementation of a Steph Curry era. I think that judging by the community responses to a question that I put out there related to, will you spend time with the Steph era and whatnot, there were some people thinking that, basically 2K has run out of ideas, and they think that this implementation doesn't make sense, that it's too recent, etc. I actually think this is great. It doesn't seem like it, Andrew, but 16, 17, and quote unquote, the Steph era, that was actually 8 years ago.
Exactly.
Right. So we're almost going on a decade.
A lot has changed. Yeah.
A lot has changed. None of the NBA teams, the rosters, et cetera, for the most part, with the exception, of course, of Curry and Draymond Green still being in Golden State, none of those rosters are the same. Right. I think that there's a lot of nostalgia for the younger crowd. For teenagers or now young adults for that mid-2010s era
Definitely.
Of hoops. So I actually think that it's a great idea, and I think this is also going to be helpful for those who are working on a UBR or URB style roster, et cetera. But I have an issue with them starting the Steph era, Andrew, in 16-17, and I'm going to give some reasons why. By not starting in 14-15, you are leaving out Steph Curry's first NBA championship, which was the true start of the Steph era, an MVP season. He won MVP that year. His first championship versus LeBron, and the true continuation after the Heat LeBron era. And by not including 15-16, you are missing out on Curry leading the Warriors to the best regular season record in NBA history, which is 73-9, which beat the Bulls' prior record of 72-10.
Oh, I know.
It was also his, oh yeah, of course, as a Bulls fan, his unanimous MVP, which is the only unanimous MVP, Andrew, in NBA history.
Exactly.
A season where he led the league in scoring with 30.1 points per game, led the league in steals per game with 2.1, and free throw percentage at 90.8, and his second matchup with LeBron in the NBA Finals. How do you start a Steph Curry era without his first championship and without that record-setting season and that unanimous MVP? Also, for those who commented that Curry doesn't deserve his quote, end quote, own era, I could not disagree more. If LeBron gets his own era based on 4 years in Miami, where he was on a super team, because people are saying, well, Curry was on a super team, it shouldn't count, and where he won 2 championships, Curry can have his own era, even if it's just starting in 16-17. The Warriors, even with KD, were playing Curry ball. Everybody who knows basketball knows this. It was still the Curry system. The entire offense was still constructed around Curry. His numbers were still at an MVP level even after acquiring Kevin Durant. And here's another stat that's very important for this debate. Durant without Curry from 16-17 to 18-19, Andrew, the Warriors were 23-17. Curry without Durant was 27-4 in that same time frame. That is a monster difference. Also, Curry won 3 championships from 16-17 through 21-22 and 4 from 14-15 through 21-22. And if you didn't want to go that high up, he won 3 championships from 14-15 through 17-18. So again, there was a Steph era, right? If you're going to give LeBron his own era for 4 years in Miami and 2 titles, Curry can have his own era. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it's silly that they didn't start this in 14-15 for the reasons that I mentioned. It doesn't make sense. I know that what you're trying to say, you and I have talked about this off air. One of the challenges for them was probably, can you really have the Steph era start so close to the end of the LeBron era?
Spreading
right?
it out a bit, yeah, absolutely.
Right, just trying to spread it out a bit. But it doesn't make sense in a historical way, right? These rosters are supposed to be a tribute to the NBA's past and to these players, right? And the ultimate tribute to Curry is to start his era with his first title. And obviously you leaving out that unanimous MVP season and that record-setting season, that just doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, should have started in 14-15, so I think that was silly by Take-Two.
Oh, I definitely see where you're coming from there. And it does mean that the Steph era name for that starting point is a bit questionable. Obviously, you do want to start in 14-15, start that run. I mean, to that point, you're not starting the LeBron era in 12-13 or 13-14. So you would certainly start the Steph era, if you're going to give that name, a little bit earlier. But again, spreading it out a bit, it does make sense to have it a bit later. You're getting a bit closer to having the class of 2018, getting Doncic and so forth in the league. Although to that point, you would probably want to start in 17-18, but then you're really getting towards the end of the Steph era, or certainly the mid-Steph era, rather than the start, which, again, 14-15 makes more sense. But I do see why they spread it out. And I have seen some people saying they're running out of ideas and that that it's just pointless to have this extra starting point. I think the whole benefit of MyNBA eras is to have multiple starting points within the decade. I'd like to see a late 90s. I'd like to see a late 80s. Obviously, going back to the 70s would be really cool as well. Running into more problems, licensing all the players from that era. Probably going to be able to get more from the late 90s, late 80s, and certainly anything else in the last 25 to 30 years. So I think multiple starting points within my NBA eras is fantastic, even within the same decade. I mean, I could see in the future them having these under the headings of 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, eventually 2020s, obviously, and maybe a couple of different starting points within them. I think that's a great idea. That gives it more flexibility, more starting points for my NBA eras, on top of, obviously, the current season, as is traditional.
First off, I'll say this is where you and I disagree. I don't understand why they did 16-17. Like, I don't give them any credit for trying to space that out a couple years. You literally called it the Steph era, and you left out his only 2 MVP seasons, right? That doesn't make any sense.
I mean,
I don't care if it's, I don't,
the name.
Yeah, I don't care if it's close. The other thing too is what happened in 14-15, Andrew? LeBron went back to Cleveland, right?
Of course.
So that's also incredibly significant in this. That started the Steph in Golden State versus LeBron in Cleveland thing. And so there's so many reasons to start this in 14-15. Here's the other reason why it doesn't make sense. Draft classes, right? That's part of this, right? Where they have their own draft classes that you can use, and they'll have more licenses for those players for, the upcoming seasons. Or they allow you to make your own draft classes. So fix them up, put players in that are missing, all of that stuff. So it's not like that continuation can't still happen that way.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I don't give them any credit for that. I think it's silly. I think it's absolutely silly. If they had enough permissions for 14-15, basically, they had enough players for the teams, they had enough permissions for the artwork, all of that stuff, then I think that it's a no-brainer that you start the Steph era in that season. Anyway, so as far as what you stated, where we kind of were hoping they would consider doing 70s, again, like we stated, I just don't think they have enough licenses and enough permissions for those players and teams.
Yeah.
So this makes a lot more sense. And like I said, it's a welcome addition for most gamers, I think, because it was 8 to 9 years ago, almost a decade ago, and there's nostalgia for that younger gamer base. A lot of these kids, that's the era that they grew up with, right? That's their earliest basketball memories, etc., which is crazy to think. That makes you and I feel like old men and whatnot. But as far as what people were stating about it being just kind of silly,
redundant,
or that, I think I got to be honest with you. I think some of these people are probably going to pick up the controls and try out that roster.
Sure.
I don't know. I think that
we've been there. We've been there where we've kind of scoffed an idea and then given it a go and then realized, oh no, that's got some merit. So
I've been that way.
Yeah,
I've been that way before about stuff. So my opinion is that more than likely there's going to be a lot of people picking this up. And you know what's going to happen, Andrew? I think this thing is going to be super popular on social media. I think that people are going to put up matchups from the 16-17 season, and those videos are going to go on YouTube, or they're going to show something on TikTok, which I hate. They're going to use social media to promote this. And I think that there's going to be a lot of interactions with that content, especially if the gameplay is improved, especially if the gameplay is solid and those rosters are solid. So we will see what happens.
Oh, no question. And the other thing is that not everything in the game is for everyone. I mean, the 90s era and the 80s era, they're going to appeal to our nostalgia and our love of history more than maybe a younger crowd. But to your point, the younger crowd has more nostalgia now for the mid to late 2010s. So that appeals to them. You pick the starting point you like. That is why we have multiple starting points, why I'd like to see them add more starting points. Now, could they be chosen better? Could they be named better? Absolutely. But I think the basic idea of having multiple starting points within the same decade does make sense. I mean, they could certainly be doing it better here and make it more logical as far as the start of the Steph era, no question. But having multiple starting points, again, I'd love to see that in the 80s and 90s as well.
Agreed. And you know what? Now that it's going to be new gen on PC, do you have any idea how much modders are going to jump over these rosters and try to complete those seasons and the seasons after them and put together just awesome retro single season mods?
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to that. So let's get to the community responses real quick, Andrew, related to the Steph era. So I asked basketball gamers. NBA 2K announced that the new era added to MyNBA eras for NBA 2K25 is the Steph era, which they have starting in 16-17. Do you plan on spending time with this era? And what are your thoughts on it starting in 16-17? So here are some of the responses. So JStash23 states, I play around with different eras before I take a more modern era seriously. I don't know about Curry era because I feel like it's the Braun era, kind of, but I'll definitely take a look. Again, I 100% disagree. Curry from 14-15 through 17-18 won 3 titles, 2 MVPs. The Warriors were, the team he was on, and they were the best team in the NBA. I absolutely think that he deserves his own era.
I agree. I mean, if you wanted to make the whole era the LeBron versus Curry era, or the Cavs versus the Warriors era, I suppose there's an argument for that. But no, it makes sense to have a Curry era. The Warriors, their dominance, his individual contributions to that dominance leading the way. Yes, Durant had those 2 finals MVPs, but you brought up that very illuminating stat before. Yeah, I mean, we can debate the starting point, as we just have, but yeah, a Steph era makes sense.
Right. If LeBron gets in his own era for 4 years in Miami, where he put together a super team, won 2 titles, got embarrassed by the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals, and embarrassed by the Spurs in 13-14's NBA Finals. Yeah, Steph can have his own era. I'm sorry. Teddy Bear the Gamer states, yeah, I'm definitely going to hop in this era. I don't know which squad I'm going to run with yet. So he's excited about it. Steven the Live King states it was just for marketing purposes, but the early 2000s era was really good last year. Might just focus on that era. It also depends on how good the dribbling system is, because that's the reason I went back to the old eras. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the dribbling system in the recent 2Ks. You and I spent quite a bit of time today on NBA 2K17, and we find the dribbling makes a lot more sense on that game. Less ball warping, better control. It just makes more sense overall. And that was the last game in the old motion system. Roy states, it is odd this point was chosen, as this was the Warriors team with Durant. This was a super team. Golden State had a title already and were coming off 73 wins. It was the first title for David West, Matt Barnes, and Sean Livingston, who I think were big pieces bench-wise. Well, again, to the super team point, so the whole thing with LeBron with Miami is that he had a super team, number one. Number two, I agree, where he states Golden State had a title already. If you're going to start the Steph era, you start it in 14-15 when they won that first title, and Curry won the 14-15 and 15-16 MVP. Patrick Maloney states, I'll check it out to pretty much attempt the Celtics run with Tatum and Brown. So that's another piece of this is, it's the Steph era, Andrew, but you can use any of the NBA teams, right? You can rewrite history, and that's what he would like to do. Is that something that you're interested in when you look at MyNBA errors, or you've tried roster mods that are similar in the past?
Oh, I definitely think that alternate history is a big appeal to MyNBA eras for sure. I mean, look at the Magic versus Bird era starting in the 83-84 season. You're coming up to the famous draft class of 1984. Does MJ go first? Does Olajuwon still go first? And obviously Barkley has to be added in custom draft classes, but if you do have the entire draft class there, does Sam Bowie go second overall? Stockton, does he go so low? And so on and so forth. The Jordan era starting in 91-92. Actually, that is a fair counterpoint, that the Magic versus Bird era doesn't start in 79-80, and that the Jordan era doesn't start with the first championship, it starts with the second. So I guess that's another precedent for that choice. But to answer your question, alternate history, I think, is a big reason for MyNBA eras, both replicating and rewriting NBA history.
Right, but there's also a big difference between the Magic and Bird era, like you mentioned, and the Jordan era. Steph Curry won his only 2 MVPs in 14-15 and 15-16.
True.
There's a huge difference there. You're leaving out his only MVP seasons, just to start it in 16-17, and you're removing his unanimous MVP, the only one in NBA history, and his first championship. So there's a lot. There are definitely a lot of differences between those.
And of course, 1984 was the first Magic versus Bird clash in the finals. So yeah, there's definitely differences. Yeah,
exactly. Rock states, I start at the Jordan era and won't change. Sounds like you, Andrew.
Yep.
Smitty states, the thing is, it's not even an era. This is more of a partial legacy recall. I think it was a huge mistake to add this. I'm sorry, but the Golden State Warriors, I completely disagree with you, Smitty. That was an era. That's an era in NBA history that will never, ever be forgotten. Whether you want to say Warriors versus Cavs, Steph versus LeBron, but the Warriors were a major part, if not the biggest part of history for the mid-late 2010. So I'm definitely going to disagree with you there. Tyler Vickery states, they should have at least started in 15-16 instead of pairing him with Durant already. Thank you, Tyler. I agree. I say 14-15, but I definitely agree with you, an earlier start. Old Head states, I usually start in the Kobe era and then sim a few seasons. I make sure rosters are correct and then usually start in 98-99 season, but I keep Bulls intact and a few other things. That's something that is very interesting, right?
Yeah,
keep the Bulls intact for 98-99 instead of Brent Barry being on that terrible Bulls team with Mark Bryant and just a super forgettable team.
Andrew
maybe
Lang,
Jordan
David. I mean, I only know it. It's only memorable to me because it's throttling back from the 6th championship to utter garbage. That's why it's memorable to me in a bad way, but I wish I could forget.
So bad. How many games did they win that season? 12 or 11 in the 50-game season?
Yeah.
I can't remember. It was really bad.
Yeah, it was one of the worst. I think the Grizzlies had the worst record with about 7 or 8 wins, but by percentage, it's not the worst. I think the Bobcats in 2012, that lockout season, I think they're the worst percentage still, possibly.
Somebody showed that Bobcats lineup recently, and I was just like, yeah, I see why they lost.
There's a classic team to add
games.
For you.
Yeah. No error around that team.
No.
Snake states, I just want to play with the teams randomly. Hopefully we're able to do that. H. Dud Bisek states, as long as they give the same attention to the LeBron era in this one, like the first 3, all home courts and jerseys for the starting year should be proper. And rebranding year by year, rather have that than an era. So I think he's alluding to the fact that there were quite a few inconsistencies and errors with MyNBA errors in the past, like the issue with the Rockets court and some of the jerseys and everything. There were just quite a few inaccuracies.
Mismatch branding, yeah. They've done some great work with that, and the fact that it does update through the years and add new teams and add new rules, etc., and formats. Look, that's really impressive. We don't want to take away from the excellent work that's gone into that. We never thought it would be possible, and they've found a way, but they definitely need to clean up some of those mismatch branding issues.
Agreed, 100%. Jolito Frito FC states, little weird that they start this era after his first title and MVP season. I know, it's insane to me.
Yeah, a lot of people pointing that out.
Yeah. To be honest, I think they could have started in 13. Those performances in New York and versus San Antonio in the playoffs really put him on the map as a star on the rise. That is true. The 13-14 season under Mark Jackson in the playoffs, he was unleashed and started to show signs of the Curry that we would see later. That one, I think, is a little bit too close.
Agreed, yeah. That is why they're spreading it out, obviously, which is why I do see the logic in that, even if I do disagree with some of the implementation and the naming, obviously.
Exactly. We have a few more responses. Draco states, I'm a develop the young Lakers core. That's a great idea. Because they've traded those pieces so fast, right? They didn't give that young Lakers core a chance to develop.
Yeah.
Right. Cuban Prophet states they just running out of crap to do. That's we were talking about that earlier on the show. Some people have that opinion. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that some of the developers are also very aware of the UBR and URB. In fact, some of those now developers were interested in those mods back in the day and used them. What I think they're doing is they're bringing PC botting ideas to everybody. Definitely. And I think that is an excellent idea. Khalid Ward states they are running out of ideas. This is unnecessary. And King states, yup, I'm taking the Spurs just like I did in 2K17 and I will beat I'm not going to say what he said, but behind. So that's also a great idea. He wants to rewrite history and he wants to kick Steph Curry and the Warriors behinds. So yeah, Andrew, those are the responses I have on X for that question.
And we have a few on Facebook, which I'll get to momentarily. Just want to reiterate that I understand where people are coming from as far as feeling that it's unnecessary or that it's overkill or whatever. I get that because I think that something like the 70s would have been more ambitious. Something like another 80s or 90s era might have been more nostalgic for people like us, people around our age. But it's not just about us. There are that younger crowd who are now grown up with that mid to late 2010s and are feeling nostalgic for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. So I get it. And I think that any content is worth adding.
Yeah, also, one more response just came in. Andrew Rodrigo states, should start in 2015. LeBron era is only 4 years in Miami. Back to my point.
Yeah.
Right? So there are quite a few people that do agree with me there.
No, a lot of people pointing that out, and rightfully so. Jumping over to Facebook for a couple more responses here. Chad says, F. Curry. Not a fan of Chef Curry there, Chad. Fair enough. I kind of got a bit sick of the Warriors versus Cavs myself. Stephen F. says, I was hoping for an older era, but I get it. No need to spend for licenses unless the player is no longer active, which for 16-17 is a much smaller number than adding licenses for a late 70s to early 80s player that isn't already in the 83-84 era. Adds, I'm still working through the 80s in 2K23, so I'm in no hurry to try this era, but with servers ending and no longer being able to get draft class mods for 2K23, I'll eventually be picking this one up. TD says, adding an era for an active player and other active players involved in the Steph era is slight cringe to me. However, I understand that it's younger kids who have nostalgia for the Steph era. I might dabble in it a bit, but I tend to play the early 2000s and before that. And once again, it is important that we realise that not everything is for us, that this is an option that may appeal to somebody else, and to his point, he may still dabble in it.
Yeah, I have two quick points to make as well related to Steph Curry. There's some people that it seems like don't like him or think he doesn't deserve his own era. I also want you to think about Steph Curry's popularity on a global scale, right? Steph Curry has been one of the most popular players in the world for 10 years now, 10, 11 years now. Fans take to him. He's stayed out of trouble. He's an awesome personality. He's been really good for the game. To a lot of people, he changed the game, right? For better or worse, because of his unreal skill set. And that skill set does appeal to so many people around the world. So his popularity needs to be factored in here as well. And another point I want to make, because people are, stating that this is kind of unnecessary. We actually kind of heard the same rumblings when they added some classic teams that were so recent. Remember when they added the 15-16 Warriors?
Yep.
They were like, are you really going to call this a classic team?
The Raptors, 2019, yeah.
Right. And that was a lot more recent at the time. So they're going back almost a decade here. So this is not even close to as bad as when they were adding those as classic teams. I think when you go almost a decade into the past, you can call that a different era, because basically all NBA teams for the most part are completely different. Right? Not only from a branding standpoint, but from a roster standpoint, coaches, etc. Popovich doesn't count, right? Popovich is just, yeah. I'm convinced Popovich is just going to coach until he dies. Like, he'll still be a coach in 2040 at this point. But yeah, those are just 2 points I wanted to bring up.
Royce, who also answered on Twitter, adds a bit more detail here, says, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, at least to me. One could play the amazing mods done by the community for the 2016-17 season, or play 2K17 with mods. Just seems like it was hurriedly thrown together. I was also hoping for an older era, but I just see 2K getting more and more lethargic, inactive, indifferent, apathetic, careless, uninterested in advancing or making their game better. They are now, I feel, like EA Sports. They both now act like one company who turns out yearly releases that feel the same year after year, decade after decade. Just wants customers to be cash stations so they can get money. They've probably always been that way, but it seems more noticeable now more than ever, to use the words of John Mellencamp. Once again, Royce, I do appreciate your pop culture references there. 2K were the darlings of basketball gaming, Derek, and they have become more and more like EA over the years. 2K, although it hasn't fallen as Live did in quality, has certainly stagnated in some ways. So, again, as we said on a previous show, I understand the skepticism and cynicism, but at the same time, I do also appreciate them adding any new content, because that is something for modders to work with. And although 2K17 is fantastic, and as we will attest to on this very episode shortly, not everybody can go back.
Yeah, and Royce, I definitely see where you're coming from. They're spending way more time, putting in gambling mechanics and making, all of that look flashy and cool and enticing, and spending time on making sure the game is an intentional grind than they are on making sure the classic players and teams are represented accurately, right? So I see what he's getting at, and I definitely agree. I'm one of the main people over the years that have called out the roster issues with the classic content in the NBA 2K games. We've talked about it on many episodes in the past, but, signature shots being wildly inaccurate all over the place, disrespecting players like Michael Finley and so many others based on their speed, acceleration, and athletic ability, doing copy and paste tendencies, signatures, copy and paste badges, copy and paste attributes, etc., making J.R. Ryder have the same signatures as LeBron James and everything. So the bottom line is sure, it is great that they're representing these different eras. And yes, it is a great base for us for like a UBR or URB style roster. But at the same time, the fact that they've gotten away with making that content low priority and disrespecting these players and teams and having so many inaccuracies over the years when they could have simply just hired a small team to fix them, to do them right, a team that cared, even one person, Andrew, One person, you bring one person in, and there's also people out there that would do it for free. But they've intentionally made it low priority, and their main priority is getting in people's pockets. So, Royce, I want to let you know that we definitely agree with you there.
And of course, agendas, as we've spoken about before on many occasions, much to our chagrin.
Oh, absolutely. That's also a part of this.
And one more response here from Martin B., kind of a sidebar, Derek, says, calling it the Kobe era is a bit of a misnomer. The better name for it would be the Kobe versus Timmy era. And I guess I see that point, because Shaq was the finals MVP on that three-peat in the early 2000s, although Kobe was certainly a star as well, and you could argue just as important, certainly. And yeah, the Spurs obviously won 3 championships during that decade as well. And hey, KG was also one of the top players during that era. You could call that the new generation or Generation 2K or something. You could certainly find other names for it. But Kobe is the biggest star, the biggest name. So it makes sense to name it after him.
Yeah, I see where he's coming from, but Tim Duncan just doesn't have the same draw. He doesn't have the same lore. They don't put Duncan in the same conversations that they do Kobe, right? So I understand where he's coming from. I mean, Tim Duncan won 5 NBA championships, just like Kobe Bryant. He was obviously a superstar during that quote-unquote Kobe era. But, I think it's a little bit different. And I see why they called it the Kobe era. But, you could also call it the Tim Duncan era. So, yeah, I see what he's saying.
Not the most marketable name, despite being certainly arguably top 10 all-time, Tim Duncan. That being said, he is the cover player of one of the best games of all time, Live 2000.
This is true. And as we've talked about before, we wonder if the original cover athlete for NBA Live 2000 was supposed to be KG because of that intro, where it's not Tim Duncan, it's actually KG playing on the blacktop. I don't know if we ever confirmed that, but from memory, the original cover star of NBA Live 2000 was going to be Kevin Garnett.
He's also dancing in the credits, an animated KG dancing in the credits of Live 2000 PC. So possibly, I might have to reach out to Rod Redekop and see if I can get an answer on that.
That would be great.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So the other question, Andrew, that I asked the community related to my NBA eras is, which my NBA era in NBA 2K25 do you plan on spending the most time with? The Magic versus Bird era, the Jordan era, the Kobe era, the LeBron era, or the new Steph era? And we received a few responses on X, formerly known as Twitter, at B-Ball Video Game states, I spent a ton of time starting with the Magic versus Bird era in NBA 2K23, and I'm still playing through it to this day, but this time, I think I will start with the Kobe era just to get into the early 2000s sooner. That's a great idea to mix things up and to keep things fresh. T Gentry, so at Bucky T, states, I like playing with eras where the players are no longer active, so I'll likely play the Magic and Bird era, Jordan and Kobe era. Really wish they would add an older era, so he was hoping for the 70s. King states, I usually do Kobe era and play as the Rockets with Yao Ming and T-Mac. I plan to play the Steph era, but as the Spurs. And Tyler Vickery states, we need a second Bulls three-peat era, and you would not scoff at that, Andrew.
Not at all. That's what I want.
Definitely be okay with. Yeah, if Andrew had to choose a new era, that would probably be it, and only for selfish reasons.
Of course. Yeah, once again, it's all about me. But that is the point, is that it is about all of us, and getting those multiple starting points, I think, is the should be the long-term goal of my NBA eras, and it certainly seems to be. So we will see what happens in that regard. And there are, with those late 90s classic teams in the game, they already do have a lot of players in the game for that, and they're there for the early 2000s as well after they're established. So I'm guessing it would be viable. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And Andrew, I did have one response on Discord from ZCB44. He states Kobe era. I was born in 96, so the 2000 Stars are who I grew up watching in real time. 2008 Redeem Team was my generation's 92 Dream Team as well. Just the era I'm most nostalgic for. So yeah, he's going to be starting with the Kobe era.
As we said, people younger than us have nostalgia that's a bit more recent than ours, so totally makes sense.
Exactly.
So that's our take on the new era in MyNBA eras in 2K25. Thank you to the community for sharing your thoughts with us as well. And there was more news in the NBA 2K25, MyNBA and MyGM courtside report, Derek. To that point, MyGM is actually back. They are bringing MyGM back as a separate mode. It was originally combined with MyLeague to become MyNBA in 2K21 Next Gen, of course, but they're bringing it back. It's the RPG-based franchise experience. There are multiple backstories to choose from. You can be an ex-player transitioning to the front office, an ex-scout being promoted, a financial savant, a capitalist with connections, Derek, or an expert deal-maker. Your choice in backstory determines your starting attributes. You can level up, kind of like a My Player. There's going to be MyGM builds, basically. There's also going to be seasonal-based builds. From what I can see, there's going to be more perks that you can earn that will come through in the seasons. So it's kind of like the franchise version of My Career, I suppose. And there's also going to be a MyGM building which you can run around, Derek, and talk to NPCs, your staff, kind of like the city with My Career and My Player, which, look, that might be novel at first. People might enjoy that, but as somebody who has played a lot of My Career, Derek, running around the neighborhood and the city certainly does get old, so good luck with that. I'm more of a MyNBA guy, Derek. I prefer that traditional experience, and of course the new retro experience that brings, but a lot of people did like the RPG-based MyGM, so not a bad idea bringing it back.
I've never been interested in that, but I see the draw, right? There's a lot of people who like to play GM. There's a lot of people, even in the community, who like to watch computer versus computer, Andrew, right? We've seen a lot of that, and videos go up on YouTube related to CPU versus CPU. People like to put matchups out there and just see how it plays out. And sometimes they don't want to be on the sticks. So yeah, whether you're playing the games in MyGM or watching the games and just kind of basically playing armchair GM, I think that, it's good that they're bringing it back.
And it'll also be conversations where you guide the conversation according to your charisma attributes and so forth, and your other skills. Whether you're a player, you can relate to players a little bit more, things like that. It all comes down to the backstory and the different perks that you earn as you level up. There's also a ranked mode with leaderboards, and there are also goals which earn XP to level up. There's a maximum of 20 levels. You get perks at levels 4, 8, 12, and 16, with the final 2 perks at level 20. Each backstory has its own unique ultimate perk chosen at level 12. So definitely RPG-based. In fact, the level cap of 20 reminds me a lot of the vanilla Fallout 3, actually, Derek. But yeah, a lot of people do like this RPG mode, so it's probably not going to be something that I touch, really. I mean, I'll certainly look into it to at least comment on it, most likely. I'm well overdue to do another written review. Haven't done a detailed written review in years, Derek, obviously because we talk about it on the podcast, but I will look into it for that. But I think MyNBA eras is the mode for me.
I like to keep my RPGs away from my sports games. I'll just put that out there.
As far as MyNBA eras, obviously the Steph Era has been added. The NBA Cup now has more detailed integration to reflect the real event. It supports between 12 and 36 teams to accommodate customized leagues. Up to 6 teams can be added or removed every season in MyNBA rather than just 6 per save, so more flexibility there. The League News Hub is going to change according to eras. They've added a Web 2.0 interface to bridge the gap between Web 1.0 and social media. So in the 2000s eras, there's going to be menus very reminiscent of NBA 2K11. So that's kind of cool there. And my staff has been condensed from 17 staff members to just 7. Governor, GM, Assistant GM, Chief Financial Officer, Head Coach, Head Scout, and Team Doctor. That's been done to streamline the hiring process and avoid overwhelming gamers with too many tasks, but you can also hire bonus staff under those categories for further boosts. So apart from the addition of the Steph Era, which is still huge, obviously not a lot of big changes to MyNBA eras, but a few tweaks there. I think what people really wanted to hear, Derek, were things like the sim engine or the stats engine. People want to see improvements to that, so that might come as a disappointment to people, but a little bit of work under the hood here.
Question for you, Andrew. Is there anything that you would have liked to see that they didn't add?
Nothing comes to mind, but I haven't spent enough time as a franchise gamer in recent years. I've been too hooked on my career and then my team, so I can't comment on some of the stats issues. I can only go by secondhand information here, but obviously also fixing up the accuracy of historical player ratings and tendencies and so forth. But they're not going to come out and say, oh, by the way, we sucked at that and we made them better this year. So I guess they wouldn't really say that even if they had indeed done that. But yeah, I guess those are the things that come to mind for me.
If the gameplay is good, these are going to be the three things I spend the most time with NBA 2K25. One, my team. I dabbled in it quite a bit with NBA 2K21 and NBA 2K22. If the gameplay is good and the players play like they should, and the challenges make sense and aren't boring, I will more than likely spend a decent amount of time in that mode. The WNBA, my oldest brother is a huge Caitlin Clark fan, the biggest Caitlin Clark fan, Andrew, that I know. And he wants to start a season with her. And more than likely, I'll get my other brother in on it, and all three of us are going to start a WNBA season. And the third item that will make me spend time on the game is just awesome roster mods, right? The community creating amazing roster mods using MyNBA Eras as a base. And if the gameplay is good, I'll definitely spend a lot of time with those.
I think MyNBA Eras will be my mode of choice, but I will dabble with my team. Once again, to your point, if I enjoy the gameplay. No word on my WNBA yet, which is, of course, the WNBA franchise mode in the new gen version of NBA 2K. They did post a courtside report on the W, which is the WNBA equivalent of my career. It's going to be centered around a story called The Pursuit of Greatness, basically about becoming the greatest WNBA player of all time. Pretty much just adding some depth that wasn't there from my career, fully voiced press conferences, weekly community goals are returning. Your level of participation matters here, but everybody gets a reward if the community hits the goals 4 weeks out of 6 every season. A mentorship mechanic has been added. There's rewards throughout the year, like my career, and there's a new court for the W Online, which is an outdoor court situated in a forest grove. Looks pretty cool. I'm all about having cool places to play on the virtual hardwood and blacktop, Derek. I recently posted a 2K6 video in a practice court in 2K6, obviously, playing with the Dream Team, creating the missing plays, obviously, with some minimalist modding, and playing the famous scrimmage the 92 Dream Team played, and a lot of people on Facebook commented on the court, thought it looked really cool, and 2K6 did have some really cool courts, so those aesthetics matter, the little things matter.
Your NBA 2K6 kick is still active, and that blows me away. You're still into it.
It's in the rotation,
and for their first entry for Xbox 360, and then finally they released on PS3 for NBA 2K7. It was a pretty strong start to new gen, which NBA Live 06 was not.
Yeah, we've talked before about the importance of that, and it set the tone for a generation.
Exactly. So, Andrew, another one of your favorite games, possibly your favorite NBA 2K of all time. We played NBA 2K17 today, and I thought this would be a good idea. And I reached out to you on X about this. I said, you know what? Let's represent the Steph era with NBA 2K17, and I'll upload a video to YouTube. Let's use the Warriors co-op versus the Cavs. And the reason why this represents the Steph era is because the rosters in NBA 2K17 are based off of the 16-17 season, which is when the Steph era starts. And we went into this game just with the default settings for 2K17. So basically you boot up the game and it's the default settings. The only adjustment that I made was turning body up sensitivity to 0 for CPU and user. And man, Andrew, that game is so pick up and play. We had a great session. We played 6-minute quarters, and we won that game. And we had, as you stated, a very Warriors-like run in the third quarter, which put us up double digits. But yeah, what a fun time that was with 2K17 earlier today.
Well, of course, but I must admit, Derek, I'm a bit confused.
Why are you confused, Andrew?
Well, I've been reliably told that 2K17 was bad and everybody hated it and only pretend to like it now because they want to hate on the new game.
Well, to that point, Andrew, no, this is not scripted, folks, I swear. I actually listed the advantages, gameplay-wise, of 2K17, the last game in the old motion system,
there are many,
over NBA 2K24 and games really since NBA 2K17, for the 2K18 and up. So on 2K17, what we experienced was far better foot planning, no skating at all, really, throughout the entire session. Less suction. Sure, there's the body block defense, which, it's like the brick wall defense, but you can get around it and it's not nearly as frustrating as the canned suction all over the floor. Less canned animations on defense, Andrew. Great steal and block mechanics. No canned blocks in NBA 2K17. No canned steals in 2K17. Just as fun to play defense as offense, in my opinion. Less ball warping, more control of the dribble. So, the ball isn't just warping from hand to hand unrealistically. The dribbling controls overall make sense when it comes to going behind the back, crossing over, initiating a size up, all of that. Better fast break logic and overall player movement logic. Somebody actually commented on the fast break logic on the YouTube video. Far better shooting feel, much more realistic overall, as far as the way the shooting forms work, the time they take from when they leave the floor and then have to release the ball, etc. And better presentation. Crowd is more into it, better arena sounds, just better atmosphere overall. And another big one, Andrew, way better rim mechanics, way more realistic rim mechanics. How many different bounces did we get in that 24-minute game? Off the front of the rim, the back of the rim, and in, off the backboard, front of the rim and in, and then swishes and then drains and toilet bowls and all of that stuff. Just way better and more realistic ball to rim mechanics. So, yeah, a lot of advantages, in my opinion, to 2K17, and we just had a really, really fun time in that session. We did pull out the win. Curry went off. He ended up being the player of the game with 23 points in a 24-minute game. We had some nice, shots on the move with Kevin Durant, a couple nice throwdowns. Iguodala had some nice throwdowns as well. Klay Thompson with a couple 3-pointers and another basket and foul. So, yeah, I thought that session went incredibly well.
I'm the first one to hit back against buzzwords, Derek, but organic, authentic, that's what 2K17 is, and that's what we want out of a basketball game. It was mentioned in the comments that even the mess up when we got a bad angle on the pass and it just ricocheted off the backboard and ricocheted long, and LeBron was able to get it on the fast break and throw down that dunk, that looked so realistic. And even though it was a blunder on our part, it wasn't in our favor, I really appreciated that. It was a really good play by the CPU, and you also want the intelligence of the CPU as well. You mentioned the positives of 2K17 there, and there are many. And the greatest games, the best basketball video games of all time, they have so many great attributes that you can just list as you did. And they're not perfect, obviously. They have some issues, but those issues are not insurmountable. And they're not distracting possession to possession. And that's what makes 2K17 so great, like all the great games, that it has minimal issues that you just can't get over. There's minimal frustrations moment to moment in that game. You're just having a blast throughout. I remember playing online in 2K17. There were some tuning fixes they pushed through that we had a couple of rough sessions based on that. And you can go back and listen to the podcast at the time, and we talk about how some of the tuning fixes kind of botched online play for a week or two, and then they fixed it with the next tuning fix. So they were really on top of things at 2K17. It's the last traditional 2K in many ways before it really exploded into the neighborhood, obviously, and becoming an MMORPG, as it really has in my career. Yeah, just such a fantastic game. Great modes across the board, great gameplay, and it holds up. Like I say, Derek, authentic, organic, brilliant.
It was also the last 2K that people felt was fair to them. It was the last 2K where people felt that, the company wasn't trying to take advantage of them.
Definitely.
Right? It was far more fair to the consumer. I also want to point out another pro in NBA 2K17 that is far better than what we've gotten in the new motion system and with NBA 2K24, et cetera. The feel of catching the ball and accelerating. the feel of catching the ball and going, the feel of, just running up the court and feeling that foot planning and feeling the pace of how, basically how it should feel to move a basketball player around a court. One of your biggest issues with the newest 2Ks are the stop and go mechanics, right? The sluggishness and janky feel of it. The game forcing you into dribbles and hesitations and weird movement that you did not initiate, right? Like when you're playing NBA 2K17, you feel like you have control of your player and you feel like you can move him the way he moved in real life. So I do want to bring that up as well. I feel like the player movement in that game just makes sense.
It really does. And I'm not sure the exact engine they're using in 2K17 because they weren't promoting EcoMotion anymore. But the fact that it does resemble its immediate predecessors in feel, I do think it's still running on EcoMotion or some version of that engine and motion tech.
Yeah, whatever they were using, it was right.
It was awesome. Yeah,
it's awesome. And it made sense. And the pick up and play piece, without having to touch the settings, is just so key. Right. And that means that it appealed to a mass audience. It appealed to the majority of basketball gamers, Andrew. The majority of basketball gamers pick up the game and either choose a base difficulty or don't even change the difficulty. They just start hooping. Right. And whether that's locally or online or whatever, they're just not messing with the settings. So I think that that's just such a positive aspect of 2K17 that we can just throw it on using the default rosters, not messing with the settings, and have a fun time.
Speaks volumes, absolutely. I played 2 games this week that end in 7. NBA 2K17, obviously, and NBA Live 07. Now, it's not a very fair comparison because 07 is a terrible release, obviously. But man, what a difference. What a difference within 1 week to play Live 07 and 2K17.
So while NBA Live 07 is an absolutely terrible basketball game that EA Sports should be embarrassed about, and they probably still are, or at least the developers that worked on that game is my guess, it didn't change the fact that you got into the NLSC Top 10 Plays of the Week with Baron Davis on NBA Live 07 this week, and with probably the best move I've ever seen on that game, a realistic spin move into a dunk that wasn't just a complete rocket dunk. It was a reverse dunk, and he spread his legs. It looked awesome. So I will give you credit there. That was definitely a top 10 play.
Talk about everything coming together and actually triggering a contextually appropriate animation. Such a rarity in Live 07. Are you telling me that you didn't enjoy Luke Walton running the break and dishing to Brian Cook for a basic dunk?
Well, when I think of NBA action, Andrew, the last thing I think of is Luke Walton with a fancy dish to Brian Cook. My memories of Brian Cook actually are him standing beyond the 3-point line and doing that quick release shot that he does. Those are my most fond memories of Brian Cook.
I mean, the real highlight is Smush Parker, who for some reason has high flyer freestyle superstars doing a cradle dunk.
Here's the thing about Smush Parker. If you actually watch his footage outside of the NBA, I believe when he was playing overseas and whatnot, he could fly. He was one hell of an athlete. And actually, if you remember correctly, in the early NBA Live games, Smush Parker was a menace. He could jump out of the gym, if I remember correctly. I'm going to have to go back and look at the ratings, but I have a memory of Smush Parker being drafted by me and my brothers at times, and that he was a high-flying star when it came to like dunking and going to the rim and everything. So, maybe my memory serves me wrong, but that's kind of how I remember Smush Parker in video games.
Kobe Bryant's counterpoint, the late Kobe Bryant's counterpoint, he's crap.
Yeah, Kobe said that Smush Parker was not an NBA player.
Yeah,
I think he stated that he was the worst player that he had ever played with. So, Andrew, to cap off this session, NBA ShootOut 2004, my favorite game in the ShootOut series, which also extends to the NBA series, the Life and whatnot, the NBA 06 through NBA 10.
Of course.
And remember that NBA 10 didn't get released on consoles, but it did get released on PSP, and I uploaded footage of that. I actually think that was a very solid release for them. You had never played this game. And like I stated, I really enjoy it. We use the Rockets co-op versus the Trailblazers, and Bill Walton and Ian Eagle are on the mic. I think Bill Walton is true to form and is excellent during the broadcasts. But how did you feel about your first experience with Shootout 2004?
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and I love that you always pick these great matchups when we play. You always have these great ideas for these historical matchups, because sometimes we pick the best teams and we have an epic showdown with the top teams from that era or that particular year, as the case may be. But then other times we'll have those two mid-tier teams and have them battle it out. And interesting lineups, as the 2004 Rockets and Blazers were. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it's a series that I haven't spent as much time with, mostly because, well, first of all, it's a PlayStation exclusive, and during the 7th gen, I was on Xbox 360, didn't get my PS3 until many years later. And on top of that, the series was a North American exclusive for the most part. Outside of a couple of releases, didn't come to PAL regions, so I wasn't able to play it. And it goes without saying, but that did contribute to its, I guess, lack of global popularity, because you need to be able to import those games and have a console that will be region-free, modded to be region-free, or later on the PS3 was region-free by default, so I've been able to import some of the games on that era. But yeah, I was quite impressed with the pace. The Live 2004, I love Live 2004, it is one of my favorite games, but I prefer to tweak the sliders to have a less frenetic, more realistic pace. Out of the box, Shootout 2004, much more impressive in that regard, and some really impressive foot planting and steel mechanics. Yeah, they had something going there.
Yeah, so first off, you talked about the Rockets and Trailblazers teams themselves. Two memorable veterans on these teams. So for the Rockets, we had Glenn Rice at the end of his career, right? And we were able to do damage with him, and I thought he was really fun to use. You had a couple nice moves with him, shooting shots in the mid-range. And the Blazers with Dale Davis, who threw it down on us hard multiple times. This is also the end of his career. And I love those veterans, Andrew, on random teams, on weird teams and whatnot. And, thinking about how they ended their careers with those teams, et cetera. So I wanted to note those two players.
And of course, Glenn Rice actually wasn't on the Rockets that year. They traded him to the Jazz, who then cut him, and he ended his career playing a few games for the Clippers in 2004.
Yeah, and he had a game winner with the Clippers as well in a short time there.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I have to look that up, because he didn't get a lot of playing time. Didn't even finish the season. They cut him, and kind of an unceremonious end to a pretty good NBA career. Multi-time All-Star, obviously. But yeah, he was actually not on the Rockets that year. But I do like those outdated rosters for retro gaming. It's fun to play a what-if scenario in that respect.
And yeah, to your point, he played 02-03 with the Rockets, averaged 9 points a game, and was an important part of that team. And then obviously 03-04 was his last season with the Clippers. In fact, in that season in 02-03, Andrew, Glenn Rice started 26 games and played 24.7 minutes per game and shot 39.8% from three on 4.1 attempts per game. But yeah, those are the default rosters that start with NBA Shootout 2004. So we were playing it on the emulator. So as far as I know, I also don't have any updates or anything like that, or new rosters. So yeah, that's what you get with the stock rosters in that game.
But that's still fun, though. A lot of old games that have those early roster cutoff dates, and they don't have the official updates. So unless you do account for those last few weeks of the off-season, you get some of these phantom stints and so forth, which I've obviously written a lot of articles about over the years. 21 Friday Fives and counting on players only appearing on certain teams in games. So it's fun to see. It's fun trivia, and it's, as I said, a fun what-if scenario.
100%. So I want to go over one big advantage that I like for NBA Shootout 2004 over NBA Live 2004. One of my biggest annoyances with Live 2004 is that forced suction, where they make you pick up your dribble and then you're holding it over your head and you either have to pass out of it or you drop the ball.
It happens,
far too often.
Yeah.
In Live 2004. The other thing that I'm not a fan of in Live 2004 are all the canned blocks. I think there's a lot of them. And they happen often, a lot of forced body contact and whatnot. And that was their first year with those 2-man animations, right? So I understand that there were growing pains. And that stuff is a lot better in NBA Live 06. I think you would agree, for PC. and PS2 and whatnot. But shootout strengths, in my opinion, really fun to play defense. There's no canned animations on defense, it feels like. Awesome swats with Yao. We had so many fun blocks with Yao Ming, and they felt organic, right? Like if you jumped and you timed the block correctly, you felt like you did all the work for that swat. I do like on-ball steals as well, whether the player's dribbling or not. I think it's just as fun to play defense as offense in that game, which is why it's my favorite shootout. Right stick dribbling, it's rough. It is not even close to as good as NBA Live 2004.
It's there, though.
It's janky, but it's there. And I think people forget that. You can do right stick dribbling. The triple threat with it is not as good, with the right stick as NBA Live 2004, but it's there. And I think that that's a strength for the game that actually has the right stick dribbling. Great pace, as you mentioned. It's fun NBA action. It has excellent lighting and very lively arenas that go with the lively commentary that you get from Ian Eagle and Bill Walton. And I really do like the poster cam, the cool dunk cam that they have, where it zooms in and the guy throws it down. It reminds me of the new implementations with the 2K series where they do the cut scenes on the three-pointer. And it's a setting that you can turn off on NBA 2K, but you can also turn it off on NBA ShootOut, right? So that's not a new idea, that NBA 2K implementation. It's an idea that's been used before in games like NBA ShootOut. I had it turned off for us for most of the game, but I do like the poster cam. And then also a great selection of camera views. How did you like that NBA Live 95 style cam that I chose for our game? That isometric zoomed out view. I thought that was a great view of the action, and it was fun to play on that.
Always very nostalgic when you can pick that isometric view, for sure. I'm glad that we play on that view in any game that has it. I have really come to enjoy my broadcast views, obviously, over the years, but yeah, there's so much nostalgia wrapped up in that isometric camera angle, so that's always cool to play on. A couple of things that did stand out to me that were kind of annoying, the turning, when you have to turn and run back on defense. I know they're going for some foot planting, but it feels like there's a bit of a heavy turn, but at the same time, it is better foot planting than 2004. There's less water bugging. You don't have that hunched over running and dribbling that they brought in with 2004, so a bit of a positive and negative there. The free throw shooting, I always have to bring up a bad free throw shooting mechanic. You know that, Derek. It's another.
Oh, it's so bad.
Another weird one.
It is so bad. Oh my God, the pulling down on both sticks and then pulling up at like the same time and releasing it at a weird midpoint, and there's it's just ugly arrows and the green ball, and oh my God, yeah, terrible, absolutely terrible free throw mechanics.
It's up there with ESPN NBA 2K5, I feel, for free throw mechanics, and some of the early 2K mechanics, just overcomplicating, the team meter. There's some people I've seen really bash the team meter. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's one of the best. Would I add it to a game today? Probably not, but for the time, it was definitely the most effective. But again, moment to moment, a really fun game. I love that poster cam. It's in some of the later NBA series as well that I've played on PS3. You can see a couple of videos that I've uploaded to the channel, and I believe a couple that you've uploaded as well over the years. That cut. It's a little thing, but it's entertaining.
Agreed. I love those little touches, and I love the fact that you can turn it on or off, right? That it's not something that you have to stick with if you don't want it.
Yeah.
Right. I will agree. Another con to the game is what Roger and Nate mentioned, the Live 01 Legends. Every point guard can throw it down, right? There's little differentiation when it comes to, point guard play and whatnot, and athleticism and whatnot. And I think that those looking for more of a sim approach, maybe you at the time, right, with NBA Live 2004, would have maybe balked at that a bit and been like, why am I throwing it down with Damon Stoudemire like he could enter the dunk contest? So
right.
I know Live 2004 did better with differentiation and authenticity, and that's a big deal for a lot of people. I do want to point something out, though. Nice touch to have some hidden legends in the game, right? There's 53 hidden legends, and they have a career mode with a player lock option, which is super neat for the time. They have G League teams in there to use and whatnot. And I believe part of the career mode is you play through the G League, and that's part of your journey to the NBA. And there's just a lot of nice touches with that game, including create a dunk. Right?
Yeah.
That's something that I think that a lot of people would be into now.
Very
if
rare.
It was an implementation in the newest 2Ks, the ability to, choose where your arm placement is when you're throwing it down, how your back is arched, your body positioning,
the broken arm,
whether you want to do a windmill, right? Yeah, you saw that when I was going through it, kind of breaking my player's arm on a dunk, etc. So the create a dunk feature is unique to the shootout series. And yeah, that's something that would be popular today.
I love those NBA at 50 jerseys as well for the unlockable legends. Really cool. And
how cool was that?
Yeah,
they look awesome. I want to mod those. I want to get them into the newest games.
We both said that as soon as we saw that. We said that's something to add to a new game or an old favorite, as the case may be. And I love little things like that show that, yes, even if Live and then later 2K were the brand leaders and certainly the top two battling it out for that number one spot in sales and reception, these other games were doing some really cool things. I mean, playing a career mode where you start in the G League, or the D League as it was at the time, that was how my player started, which then became my career, of course, in NBA 2K10. But that wasn't an idea that 2K originally had. To that point, it was there in Shootout.
Yeah, and good correction there, D League, right? We're so used to calling it the G League now. But the D League is what Antoine Walker played in with the Idaho Stampede, which you think was a funny stint.
Yep.
And I also think it was a funny stint, especially because he did it until he just couldn't play anymore. As long as they would accept him, I think he was in his late 30s. He was on that court firing threes, shooting a terrible field goal percentage, et cetera. Not trying to take a shot at Antoine Walker, but his shot selection wasn't always the best. And when he was with the Idaho Stampede, his shot selection didn't get any better. Let's put it that way.
We'll have to come back to this on a show where we're not talking about so much previous season news, but Antoine Walker actually ended up leaving the NBA fairly young. He was 31 going on 32 in his last season, so when he was playing in the G League, still at an age where, if his body had let him, obviously, and he'd gained some weight and had not really looked after his conditioning, but if he'd been in better shape, probably could have played another 4 or 5 years, especially into the mid-2010s when they started opening up the more stretch bigs and stretch fours. He was still under 40 into the mid-2010s. If he'd stayed in shape, if he'd stayed healthy, he could have perhaps made it back to the league and played a few more years.
No, I agree. He was out of the NBA at 31 and played into his late 30s with the Idaho Stampede in the D League. His last season, I think he was 36 or 37.
Sounds
so
about right, yeah.
Yeah, and he had put on more weight, and just I don't think he was able to compete at a high level in the D League at that time. I think it was time to wrap it up.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about players who left too early. Ben Gordon, Baron Davis. Obviously, Davis had that horrible knee injury, but he attempted a G League comeback in the mid-2010s, as did Gordon. And Gordon was very young when he was kind of unceremoniously let go, and really sharp decline after leaving the Bulls, unfortunately. But yeah, maybe we'll come back to that topic sometime.
Yeah, I think we should bring that topic to the podcast in the future.
So we will keep that in mind. In the meantime, we will continue to talk about the NBA 2K25 preview season up until release. Once again, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Please keep the discussion going in our forum, in our Discord, and on social media. And yeah, once again, Derek, fingers crossed that the game does live up to the hype.
Yeah, I hope I can have a good time with NBA 2K25, and I hope that the majority of consumers can as well. More fun than frustration. That is the goal.
Absolutely. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week and every week, either on the NLSC, NBA-Live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC forums as D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC is on X and Facebook at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-Live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone!